Hello, check, 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 check. Hello, check, 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 check. Hello, check, check, check. Hello, check, check, check. Enjoy. Check, check, check. Hello, check, 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 check.
Check.
Okay. I should always do that? No, it will be on. It's on. Thank you. So the bottom is where the, Raji, the bottom is where the power button is, okay? Of that.
Sorry, you okay with it?
No, I just wanted to say this is a power button, so don't touch it.
Yes, yes, I know.
He told me.
Yeah, it's on. It's put off, they should start. Don't worry. It's on.
Check, check, check.
It's nice to be able to sit instead of stand. Sure. I've been waiting for the last.
Shyam?
Let's
நீங்கள் பக்கத்தில் இருங்க இப்போ முடியாது முதல்ல அதுக்கப்புறம் இது படிக்கும்போது பக்கத்தில் இந்த இதை மறைக்க
It's also a different venue for them, they're adjusting to it. Sujata, right? Sujata?
அது ரொம்ப கண்ணில் அடிக்குது அது முடியல சரி இருக்கட்டும் பரவாயில்ல
Not
பார்த்துக்கலாம்
too good, but okay.
வச்சுக்கோ
Thank you for coming, Sujata.
இது மறைக்காமல் இருக்கலாம் முடிஞ்ச வரைக்கும் பார்த்தேன் அங்கேருந்து கண்ணில் அடிக்குது இங்கே சரி ஓகே இங்கே ஆமாம் இவ்வளோ இருக்கட்டும் நாங்கள் அதை பார்த்துக்கலாம்
I like having a fan which is cooler.
இருக்கணும் கண்டிப்பாக இப்போ பிரணாம் Pranams to Sri Sadguru, pranams to Swami Sri Hari Prasad ji. So on behalf of Sri Vishnu Mohan Foundation, it's a pleasure to us to invite you all, to welcome you all to this evening's program, where Dr. Indira Peterson will be giving a talk on King Serforoji's libraries and the Madras Literary Society. I think all of you may be knowing that the Madras Literary Society is one of the very old libraries in India, functioning in functioning from College Road, I think over 200 years old. And of course, now the library is slightly, it's not, what shall I say, a lot of development needs to be done for the library. And we hope that this talk would sort of make people aware of the rich legacy of this library, and more people will come forward to help the library to attain its a very glorious state which it deserves. Now a few words about Dr. Indira Peterson. So, Dr. Indira Vishwanathan Peterson is a professor of Asian Studies Emerita at Mount Holyoke College, USA. She held the David B. Truman Professorship at Mount Holyoke, has been Professor of Sanskrit at Columbia University, and 40th Anniversary Professor at the Five College Consortium of Western Massachusetts. She has a BA Honours in English Literature from Bombay University and MA and PhD degrees in Sanskrit and Indian Studies from Harvard University. Professor Indira Peterson specializes in Indian literature in Sanskrit and Tamil, Hinduism and South Indian cultural history and performing arts, especially music. She also works on European Indian cultural contact and comparative literature. She has lectured and published widely in these fields. Her major publications include Poems to Shiva, The Hymns of the Tamil Saints, Design and Rhetoric in a Sanskrit Court Epic, The Kiratarjuniya of Bharavi, Arjuna and the Hunter, Tamil Geographies, Cultural Constructions of Space and Place in South India, co-edited with Martha Selby, and Performing Pasts, Reinventing the Arts in Modern South India, co-edited with Davesh Soneji. In her forthcoming book, Tanjore Renaissance, King Serforoji and Indian Modernity, Dr. Peterson tells the story of the encounter of multiple Indian and European knowledge systems, arts and sciences in South India's premier cultural center in the 19th century under the leadership of the Royal Polymath Serforoji II of Tanjavur. Also in progress is drama, The Court and the Public in Early Modern India about Kuravanji and other Tamil dramatic and musical genre in the 17th and 18th centuries. Indira Peterson has held a number of research fellowships, including fellowships from the Guggenheim Foundation, the American Council of Learned Societies, the National Endowment for Humanities, the American Institute for Indian Studies, the Social Science Research Council, the German government Alexander von Humboldt Foundation, and the Rockefeller Foundation. She was honored with the 2022 New England Choice Award for Leadership in Art and Culture. Now it's over to Professor Indira.
Thank you so much for that gracious introduction, Mr. Padmanabhan. These are, of course, I don't call you usually Mr. because these are family. My cousin Padmavati Padmanabhan was the one who is the descendant of people who have been dedicated to the, and Rajiv and Nitya, who are all here, are descendants of Shri V. Doraiswamy and also Mr. P. Ramakrishnan, who were both avid members of the Madras Literary Society and library in different generations, P. Ramakrishnan first and then V. Doraiswamy. This morning I gave the second V. Doraiswamy Endowment lecture, and it seemed very appropriate when Padmavati told me that the buildings of the library are going to be renovated and grants have been received. This was great, joyous news, and I have been working on different set of libraries and which have connections with this Chennai library. And since this is a heritage library, I thought it would be appropriate to bring that portion of my forthcoming book on Serforoji to an audience in Madras, that is Chennai, or Chennai, that is Madras, as you would like to have it. So thank you, all of you. I have a few pictures right away, and I might want to just go through them. But most importantly, I wanted to start out by saying that my talk is really about the libraries of Raja Serforoji. It is not about the Madras Literary Society Library. It is about, as I say in the title, the connection between Serforoji and what existed before the library was formed or the society was formed. There were a number of people whom Thomas Troutman, in a brilliant book, has called the Madras Orientalists, or the Madras School of Orientalism, which established its own identity quite separate from what had been imposed on them by Calcutta, William Jones, and all the things, that the so-called Bengal Renaissance. So that's why my book is called Tanjore Renaissance. It's a sort of, response to the idea that there was only one cultural flowering in all of India in that time. In any case, so I wanted to quickly start with a few pictures, and I'm very sorry that one of my great benefactors, friends and colleagues, Professor Venkatachalapati, who has just received the Sahitya Academy Award, very richly deserved, and master of the province of the book. His book, The Province of the Book, is just a brilliant, it's a masterpiece of understanding what books, libraries, print culture, and all these things mean in their South Indian and particularly Tamil setting. And he was the one who facilitated my research at the Madras Literary Society Library. So with that preface, let me just quickly move on. I think the lights are sort of bright, but you can still see, and you know these buildings. I had no time. I have been traveling. I have been sick. I have had no time to put together anything organized. What I'm going to do is to simply take from different parts of my book, and I'll be, you have a little outline here, and I'll refer to that in just a minute. But what I want to do is to begin with the practical. Mr. Sham wanted to make sure my face wasn't dark, so that was part of the issue, yes. Otherwise, that could be a problem. So let's leave it like that. The first few photos are just random photos I pulled from my photo library, but they are telling because there I am in 2018 with the great figures who are working at the Madras Literary Society, doing wonderful things, restoring old rare books. And there's the catalogue of the library, which I was able to see from, it's a very late catalogue, it's from the 1880s, so it doesn't tell you what the library was like in 1820, but still it's some place to begin. And there are the women, the girls really restoring old rare books with professional skill. They've been taught how to do that, so this library too will be preserved. And there is Padmavati Padmanabhan with a photo of one of the first rare book exhibits at this library, which revived its reputation in Madras under P. Ramakrishnan and a bunch of other people. And so I ran into her at the library. We hadn't planned anything. I said, "What are you doing here?" And she said, "What are you doing here?" And so I thought these were fun pictures, and I wanted to share them. My talk, as I said, is about Serforoji, and now you may quickly look at that one-page handout I have given. You can see that I'm writing a biography of Serforoji, which has been in the works for some time, and there were distractions. Most recently, the loss of my family. I lost my husband and my daughter, so I stopped writing. I'm now returning, which is why I don't have any, proper formalized things here, but it's going well, and hopefully soon it shall be published. So the book is divided into several sections: Becoming Serforoji, Performing Kingship in Colonial Tanjore, Engaging Europe. Not that these things are separate, but these are sections which focus on particular topics. And then Beyond the Walls of Tanjore Fort, Travel and Public Projects. And what I will do is I will read from a wholly inadequate early description of the book because I haven't come up with my most recent revised one, but this will do. This book is an intellectual biography of Serforoji of Tanjore, 1798 to 1832, a fascinating figure in Indian and world history. Ruler of a small kingdom under British colonial supervision, Serforoji built on his European education, unusual for Indians in his time. And I will mention why he was educated. And you will all agree that in 1793, it was quite unusual for a young South Indian prince to receive a full-fledged European education, but that is what he received. He built on his European education to achieve a remarkable synthesis of Enlightenment, European Enlightenment, and Indian knowledge systems, and European and Indian visual and performing arts and cultural practices. He became a pioneer in India's transition to modernity and a legend in his own time, and he's a legend now in our time. The king's initiatives ranged from the practice of experimental science in the Western mode to the translation of Indian medical works, and it's not just translation, synthesis of Siddha Vaidya, Unani, and Ayurvedic traditions, interestingly enough, in the Tamil Siddhar style in 18 volumes called Sarabendra Vaidya Muraigal, which have been published by the Saraswati Mahal. So you shouldn't think of him as a person who studied Western medicine and did experimental science, but he was simultaneously translating all this, and the library, which I will come to, will be a witness to this activity. Assembling to the transformation of classical Indian intellectual disciplines such as Tarkashastra and Vedic studies, to the transformation of Indian classical dance and music, because at his court these formative days of Bharatanatyam and Carnatic music were there. Assembling a personal collection of 4,500 books and periodicals in the Enlightenment European disciplines, Serforoji enlarged and built up the Saraswati Mahal library, which all of us know as an Indic manuscript library, in not only Sanskrit, which it is famous for, but we should know that there are large numbers of Marathi, Telugu from the Nayak period, but Marathi from the Maratha period, which was 150 years of the rule by Shivaji's relatives, the Bhosles, in Tanjore, and they were the people who stimulated the so-called Tanjore Renaissance. He built it up with an immense collection of further manuscripts, and more importantly, he documented all the change that was going on. This was a very important thing, so that you can go to that library and trace how things went from one point to another, how from the Nayaka to the Maratha, and how European influences came into every form of literature or every form of performing art and visual arts. He also established, he made it into a modern library. That is something we need to know. He also established schools for children, free schools in his fort, and I'll say in just a minute that Serforoji was king in name only, as we all know. The British in 1798 put him on the throne after an adoption controversy which deprived him of the right to the throne because the legality was contested. 11 years of incarceration by his rival Amar Singh, his uncle. It's sort of, I think of it like a Kamsa story, Kamsa and Krishna. And he writes to the British, Serforoji writes to the British and says, they aren't even letting me learn how to read and write. They're putting me in a dungeon. I think of the Princess in the Tower of London, you know. So he's sitting there and writing letters to the British, please give me an education. And that explains why finally the missionary, a famous missionary, Schwartz, rescued him from Amar Singh, took him to Madras, and Serforoji is already over 15 years old, and there, 14 years old, and there he receives, only for 2.5 years, a tutoring from missionaries, and he emerges like a butterfly from a cocoon, fully conversant in all these arts and sciences. So he must have been brilliant. Anyway, let me finish this argument. Translating, so he also established a printing press for disseminating the new learning, which is why I call it a renaissance. It wasn't just in Bengal that things were going on, but Serforoji single-handedly in 1795 to 1798, when he came to the throne, and the very next year, when he was deprived of the throne, the British took over all of the erstwhile Tanjore kingdom, leaving Serforoji with only the fort, the Tanjore fort, the big fort, the palace within it, and the temple within the small fort. So this was his kingdom, and a few properties outside of Tanjore. So it is from there that he became a pioneer of Indian modernity, translated his personal engagement with all these things into effective public institutions. This is the point. He didn't keep it to himself. And he became a pioneer of Indian modernity and an important figure in the global production and circulation of all kinds of knowledge in the 19th century. This is a key point. Not Indian knowledge, not European knowledge, but all kinds of whatever was happening. He was a participant, a mover, and a shaker. And this is particularly remarkable when you consider that he was a non-entity in a seized kingdom, and he was a prisoner virtually in that kingdom and couldn't even travel outside, an armchair traveler in realms of gold. And then I don't need to go into what I'm doing in the biography. Let's just talk about the library. I think of the library, a library, as a realm of knowledge. This is a wonderful phrase that Dominic Vujastik, my colleague at British Columbia, coined. He in fact called Saraswati Mahal a realm of knowledge. And I would say within that realm of knowledge, Serforoji's European personal collection is yet another realm of knowledge, and the two talk to each other all the time. And I will show how that came to be. Let me then begin with why I chose the library. I chose the library, as I said, because it's the realm of knowledge and everything is documented and traceable there. And my work has been for 25 years in all of these libraries, and most recently at the Madras Literary Society, and I'll come to that in a second. The fort's mighty walls touch the sky. Its wide moat plumbs the netherworld. This is splendid Tanjore, beautiful city ruled by Serforoji, beloved son of illustrious King Tulaja, scion of the noble Bhosala dynasty. He has mastered the ritual texts and arts, Vedic scriptures and sacred law, and the whole of the books of law of Manu and others. He protects the earth as king of kings, hailed by rulers in every land. Don't laugh, but basically, this is written in 1825. He started, quote, end quote, ruling in 1798, and he's a total non-entity by 1825, but he's king of kings. He journeyed to Kashi, holy city, he did, bathed in shining Ganga's tranquil waters, worshipped the lotus feet of Lord Vishwanatha, gladly received the God's blessing, and returned home to abide in joy. Siva Kurundu Deshikar, the author of the Kutrala Kuravanji, and later on, Pandit, second headmaster and Pandit at the Madras, we're coming to the Madras connection, they wrote to Serforoji and said, we hear you have an illustrious Tamil Pandit called Sivakurundu Deshikar. Could you please send him to teach others at the College of Fort St. George, which is the college started in association with the Madras Literary Society? And sure enough, Serforoji obliged, and after this was written in the did I say Kutrala Kuravanji? I'm sorry, I erred. It is the Sharabhendra Bhupala Kuravanji that he wrote, which was to give Tanjore its own Kuravanji for its own king, which would rival or equal the older, more than 100 years older Kutrala Kuravanji of Tirikuda Rajappa Kavirayar of Tirunelveli district. Now, Sivakurundu Deshikar was writing this around 1824, and we can date it because Serforoji made it 1.5-year pilgrimage to Kashi and Prayag and Gaya, the Tristali Yatra, and I have a whole chapter on that pilgrimage. And that Tristali Yatra gave him the first opportunity to make an extensive tour outside of Tanjavur, and he did everything he possibly could. And we can't talk in detail about that, but that's a very interesting thing he did. When he came back, he brought more than 5,000 manuscripts, which were already rare, of rare texts in every field of Sanskrit learning, deposited them and had them copied in the Saraswati Mahal Library. And when A.C. Burnell came to document and catalog this wonderful Saraswati Mahal Library in 1873, 1874, by which time the kingdom was extinct, because with Dalhousie's law of lapse, King Shivaji, the son of Serforoji, died without an heir, and the queens lost the case in continuing the kingdom. So by now the British took over everything, including, they tried to take over the Saraswati Mahal as well, and they certainly wanted to document everything. And he said, this is one of the rarest manuscript libraries in India, and we should preserve it. So who was responsible for that? It was Serforoji. Those 5,000 manuscripts were an incredible enrichment. Now the second reading I have is, I have been passing the last 4 days in the society of a Hindu prince, the Raja of Tanjore, who quotes Fourcroy, Lavoisier, Linnaeus, and Buffon fluently. He has formed a more accurate judgment of the poetical merits of Shakespeare than those so felicitously expressed by Lord Byron. Look at who he's being compared with, Byron, and has actually emitted English poetry very superior to Rousseau's epitaph on Shenstone, at the same time that he's much respected by the English officers in his neighborhood as a real judge of a horse and a bold, deadly shot of a tiger. The truth is that he's an extraordinary man. You notice, the poet said that he was like Manu, he had mastered the Vedas and literature, and he had, in his own way, and he knew about all of the realm of knowledge that is Indic. And they didn't mention Marathi there, but he was also, this is the great repository of Marathi literature, starting with Ramdas and various other major authors. So Serforoji commanded this realm of knowledge, but this second reading is by Reginald Haber, Bishop of Calcutta, on April 1st, 1826, just 2 or 3 years after Shivakurinda Desika wrote that wonderful encomium to Serforoji in that Kuravanji drama. So what you have is that both worlds respected Serforoji, and as I shall show in this talk, in the rest of this talk, the libraries show how Serforoji negotiated these worlds, and then also, I'll take that, and also how Serforoji then connected with Madras and the Madras Literary Society. That's an additional thing. So I'm not going to go deeply into Serforoji's library. I'm going to give you a picture of it. Then I'm going to talk about his relationships with the people who constituted the I'll call it the MLS, the Madras Literary Society. But I think now it's a very good time to quickly look at some pictures, because they will show you don't need to know where Tanjavur is. This is the procession that went to Kashi, probably, most likely, because his son Shivaji is following him in a red suit behind him. And this is when the library had not received its brand new flashy facade. I'm beginning my research in 1995, and there's Saraswati. Here are some of the manuscripts, and here are the manuscripts being curated. Here's a Rigveda paper manuscript purchased in Kashi, beautiful condition, very well kept. Atmaram Grantha in Marathi, Ramdas's Devanagari thing. Bundles of Marathi Modi script documents in which all of the records of the Maratha kingdom of Tanjavur are kept. The Modi script was used not only by Shivaji and the Marathas in Pune and other places. It was the shorthand script, a cursive script, which is hard to read for modern Marathi readers. Devanagari is separate and clear, and this is a cursive script. But it was used by the British as the method of communication with the Maratha princes of all kinds, including Tanjavur. And it was also used in the accounting system all over South India because Maratha Brahmins constituted the main accountants of that period. The period I'm speaking of is when the British established themselves after the fall of Tipu Sultan in 1799, and you notice that it coincides with the time that they grabbed the Tanjore kingdom, and they then, within a couple of years, there is the Zamindari settlement, and there is only one official princely state left in South India outside of Mysore, because Mysore was always a princely state. Now, the only state is Pudukkottai. Pudukkottai, because they were collaborators with the British and they were senior princes. Tanjore should have been mentioned as a princely state, but it wasn't. Serforoji had to fight for 11 years in order to be promoted to the title His Highness from the title His Excellency. So then he was called a Raja. So there's all this going on. Some illustrated manuscript, Gaja Shastra, Ashva Shastra, and then I want to say now about what I'm going to talk about. I'm going to talk mainly, very summarily, about how Serforoji, as I said, negotiated these things and how he got acquainted with a European book. I will turn to a talk I gave on this library in various venues. I can manage this. Yeah, you can take that. You can take this. I'm just shuffling through my papers, so I will find this. 1 second. Yes, here it is. An Enlightenment Library in 19th Century India, the personal collection of King Serforoji. Don't worry, I'm not going to read anything from this. I'm just going to talk about what you're going to see. Here's one of the great artworks that Serforoji ordered from England. Flaxman, John Flaxman, was the most famous sculptor in England at the time, and funeral and memorial monuments were his specialty. St. Paul's Cathedral as well as Westminster Abbey are peppered with Flaxman's great creations. And Serforoji was the first Indian to order such a monument for his teacher, the Reverend Schwartz, who taught him, who rescued him, and he wrote a poem about him. And he placed this in the Schwartz Memorial Church. It came all the way from England. It's a marble monument and weighs tons and tons. And it was established in 1812, many years after the missionary had died. But what I'm trying to say here is that the missionaries were the first source for Serforoji to engage with the European book and European knowledge. They were from Denmark and Germany, but they taught him in English, but he was also thus able to access Enlightenment knowledge from those countries as well, which already gave him a very diverse kind of understanding of European knowledge, not simply mediated by the British authorities. This is the first grammar of Tamil, which was published by Bartholomew Ziegenbalg as early as 1716 in Halle. It was published there, but then other books were published in Tranquebar, which was the Danish station where these missionaries originally worked out of, because the British didn't want missionaries. They didn't want Indians to be converted, which was a good thing, but the Danes were very happy to have these missionaries, and they sent them out to Tanjore so long as people could. Anyway, we don't need to linger on that. I'm examining books from the personal collection. This is where Serforoji received his people, and I wanted to linger on the bookcase. The bookcase has some of Serforoji's books in French. It says number 83. So if you think of 4,500 books, including periodicals, all contemporary things, and books going back to the 17th century, I want to talk about the strengths of the library and compare it with other libraries of the time, such as the other European libraries of the time, such as the Madras Literary Society, where there would have been comparable books. I went to the National Library in Kolkata, where the Asiatic Societies and the Asiatic Society's library. I also compared Serforoji's library with the library of Emerson in Concord, Massachusetts. Jefferson, who was actually a contemporary. Emerson was much later. He was late 19th century. Remember, Serforoji's library dates from 1798 to 1832, his death. And let me say a little bit more about that. Acquisition, collection, maintenance, catalog, circulation, and exchange. Now I will say something about the Madras Literary Society. the differences between these two libraries. Individual personal collections such as that of Jefferson or Sir William Jones, those are understandable as the person's personal desire to collect particular kinds of books. Serforoji's belongs in that category. The Madras Literary Society was a public circulating library established at about the same time as the society itself, which had been operating informally. It was established around 1818, we know that. And from then on, there was a circulating function. But it was also formed out of personal collections. When people died or they went back to England or France or wherever they came from, those books came. Acquisition was through bequests, sales, auctions. People would auction after estate sales and so on, and people would buy books. Some of these books would be rare books because these British and other Europeans wanted to read. They missed all the libraries back home. So the colonial libraries in some ways were richer. Now, coming back to Serforoji, he was even more thirsting for knowledge. He was stuck in Tanjore. He doesn't even have a circulating library. He had been educated in Madras and had been to the circulating library, not the MLS library, but the Madras circulating library, which existed already. There were newspapers, periodicals, and so he wanted direct access to knowledge from Europe and not through the British. He had money. His pension, Michael Fisher points out, was higher than that of the king of Delhi, because Tanjore, the rice bowl of South India, was a rich kingdom, and he got the revenues of the rice cultivation, a portion thereof. So that fifth revenue gave him a very good pension, and here's what he does. He spends a large portion of it. So he's a bibliophile, he's a knowledge acquirer, but he also wants to put that knowledge to use and to disseminate it among his people and others. So the circulation, I could talk on and on about so he circulates to archives the products of his library and his collection. Products include also paintings, other sorts of things, natural history paintings, and so on. But let me just pause then to talk about the types of books that the MLS collected and the types of books Serforoji collected. The MLS, of course, had a lot of classics, and by that they really mean Latin and Greek, because remember, in that century, the British were classically educated. Many were soldiers, and they didn't have a classical education, but they aspired to it. They were reading Pliny and Cicero, and you'll be seeing Serforoji's collection of that. Serforoji was also introduced to the Latin and Greek classics, and he could see them in tandem with the Indian classics by Shankaracharya and Kalidasa and so on. So he had no difficulty in absorbing that. But as you heard from Bishop Haber was far more interested in Serforoji's interest in science. Lavoisier and Fourcroy was the founders of the modern field of chemistry at the end of the 18th and the beginning of the 19th century, which means hot off the press, Serforoji is receiving the latest knowledge about the latest fields, European fields. Chemistry was his passion. Medicine was his passion. For 3 years, he hired an English surgeon who was working in Madras, W.S. Mitchell. He asked permission for the government to come and teach him surgery and ophthalmology, and he established a hospital where his pandits and vaidyas would be working side by side with these English, in these English methods. He translated from Marathi to Latin to English and so on. So his library contains these books, and I will come to that in just a second. These are some of the places to which he sent things and received things, and I have a map where I show the paths by which everything goes. Here's a sample leather tool binding, something to mention. Okay, so the science stress is a special one for Serforoji. Later on, in the 1820s, the MLS also began, even 1830s, the transactions of the MLS began to focus more on science. But before that, they were doing more literature. That's why it was called the Literary Society. What is interesting then is that Serforoji beats them to the game. He's doing science in 1806, 1803, and he's doing the printing press also at about the same time. The literary society is connected to the Fort St. George printing press, and then some of the members of it, particularly Francis White Ellis, who is the most lauded figure in this group of people, and whose name has become very famous as the father of the Dravidian philology, along with Shankaraya, his colleague at the Fort St. George. That Ellis was also very interested in print culture. Language and literature were being changed by the British to teach their own civil servants the local languages. They wanted to teach them in the European way, and so they created primers, and not the classical traditional way that Pandits would be teaching and Pulavars would be teaching in Tamil and Sanskrit. But they hired these Pandits such as Shivakuranda Deshikar, trained them in European methodologies, but Serforoji had already done that, and that is what I wanted to say. Then the other thing I wanted to say was that leather bindings were a real problem. Serforoji employed Brahmins at his court to work the printing press in Devanagari, which was a language which was a script which was not used in Tamil Nadu. It was the first privately owned Devanagari press for Sanskrit. And he then also published Marathi in that. He didn't really publish anything, he printed. And I will just say one brief word about his love of print. The love of print was to make education publicly available to more people instead of holding it in thrall of the few people who had the script and who could write, and also the cost of copying and also the time it took for copying. He never came anywhere near print runs of thousands, which would be, useful for a school. But he did experiment, and he published 7 or 8 classics of the Sanskrit curriculum in the various disciplines, including Kavya, Tarka, and Mimamsa disciplines. And he actually gave it to his Pandits, and the Pandits were learning from printed books rather than. The books were not bound, they were looking like manuscripts. But Serforoji's European books were bound, as you can see, these tooled editions. And here's the catalogue of his European collection. We have a complete idea of what Serforoji had 2 years before his death. This is a bonanza for anybody who wants to study his intellectual profile. And history, geography, voyages and travels, there were 28 headings. They covered all of the Enlightenment arts and sciences. So the intellectual profile, and before that I should also say one other thing. The other thing is that this provincial library in Tanjavur, Serforoji became the giver and lender of books as opposed to the borrower of books. Though he was in a subordinate position to the British, any British or European person who lived within a multi-mile radius of that place would ride a horse and come to Serforoji to borrow books. Among the great things in the library, which I will show in just a minute, are William and Thomas Daniel's Views of India, which you find everywhere. He always had the first edition. The Asiatic researches came directly from Calcutta. The London Review came directly from London. He had an agent in London. Not only did he get them from auctions and sales, he had an agent in London from whom he directly ordered books. He hired the former resident of Tanjore, the British resident, who was unemployed in London, paid him a goodly sum of money, asked him to look out for the latest books in every discipline, including all the arts, rare books and everything, and he brought them. And I want to show you this one thing, the voyages and travels, but here. Page from a list of 650 European books on medicine and other sciences shipped by Benjamin Torin in 1806, and they have some of the rarest books. The Hortus Malabaricus of Van Rede and Roxburgh's Plants of the Coromandel Coast. These are very rare books now, rare editions, and you can tell from this one torn page that I was able to find in the archives, they were only one part of the 650. Not only that, he had ordered them once before. The ship was sunk during the Napoleonic Wars between 1803 and 1805, so he reordered them, and then they arrived. along with the Flaxman statue and the printing press by sea. So you can see what Serforoji was capable of. I wanted to show very quickly this particular, it's already 6 o'clock, is that okay? We started late, so I'll go on for a little while longer. It won't take too long. He already, as soon as he took charge of the throne, the first thing he did was he went to the Pandits and said, make me a palm leaf catalog of all the palm leaf manuscripts, which are mainly in Telugu, Tamil, and local languages. And Grantha script for Sanskrit also, from the Nayaka period. Then the Marathas were using, like the Mughals, they were using paper, and they wrote in the Devanagari script that was called Balabodh. And he said, give me a paper manuscript, a paper catalog of that. So this is the Balabodh of the Devanagari, okay, manuscripts. And then here is the Amara Kosha Prathama Kanda. Amara is the first thing Sanskrit students memorize, the names and the words of the Sanskrit language. And this is Serforoji's printed version. He got the print types, fonts from Charles Wilkins, who was the first innovator in Devanagari print in Calcutta, then went back to England. Serforoji employed him and got the printed press to come from Britain. I'm sorry that it's not very easy to see. This is the prosody of the Telugu language, and it's out of order here. But this is by C.P. Brown, one of the Madras Literary Society members, who became the authority on Telugu language. And Serforoji immediately bought this book, and C.P. Brown has signed it, so you know the date and everything. Serforoji made sure he signed every single book. All of them are autographed. And this is his most triumphant production, Aesop's Fables in Marathi, the first Asian language translation of Aesop. And this is Kahani, Landaga, Ani, Yedkachi. This is the story of the wolf and the lamb. Eka Parvata Varun, Eka Nirmal Panyacha, and so on. And it's going in simple Marathi. And he says, we have the Panchatantra, they have Aesop. We must study everything. So I'll translate this into Marathi and I will print it, and our children in our schools will have that. 1807 catalog, and then, you know, you've seen these things before. This is out of order. Quickly, the letters of Pliny, spelling book. This was the other strength of Serforoji, which was not there at the Madras Literary Society. He wanted to teach children, including his own son. English, French, every other language, Marathi, everything. So every spelling book, every teaching book that would be found in Europe at that time was there. And then here is the Balabodha Muktavali. Why isn't it moving? There's some problem here. Oh, okay, all right. European music, we won't stop here. He had a complete music collection. He had a band. He had violins, pianos, and harps. And this is what I want to say. The practice of whatever was there in his library was very important. And going back to the bookshelves, I want to say this. When visitors came, they remarked on Serforoji's collection. They were in his public drawing room that I showed the picture of. And at first, there was only one bookcase. Then there were two. Then there were four. Then by the time Bishop Haber came in 1826, there were 10 bookcases. And what is remarkable is that those bookcases no longer contain only European books. They were side by side with manuscripts and other Indic materials and scientific things that he was studying. So I would say that the bookcases symbolized the synthesis that he was. This is the slow march that Serforoji himself composed and which was played by his band. History and geography collections were very important to him. And these are all rare books, The Decline and Fall, the descriptive catalogue of the library of Tipu Sultan. He immediately bought a copy because he was curious about what Tipu Sultan had. And then he was interested in archaeology and inscriptions and paleontology. And I will come to the MLS in just a minute, then C.P. Brown's prosody. And we don't need to linger on all these books. Let it go. He said, do it slowly, and I'm doing it too fast. Exotic and the picturesque. It'll just take some time. But let me make the points while this is taking its time. You can see how many wonderful books he has in the 4,500. The point about all of this is that Serforoji then, as I said, the circulating library was where exchange of ideas with Europeans took place things which were not possible outside of that. The most important of Serforoji's collections was the new cosmologies of European astronomy and geography, and I will just pause there for one moment. The pictures are going to go very slowly, but it doesn't matter. What matters is that he had globes, he had atlases, he had a complete collection of all the books on geography published in England and in some other countries as well. And he had rare star charts and atlases which the King of England, the Royal Society, and Jefferson and the Library of Congress had, which means that he wanted to master knowledge and be in command of knowledge. And he also was the royal, this is what I wanted to say, this is a princely model which doesn't come from the European culture. It is the royal model of everyone from Akbar and before that by Bhoja or anybody in South Asia. South Asian royalty had to be mastered. The Nayaka king Raghunatha Nayaka was a master of the Veena. He was the master of Sanskrit poetry. So Serforoji had to be double master. He had to be master of the Enlightenment and particularly geography, because India was being made right in front of his eyes. While he's sitting here, the map of India changes every day. The British are changing the map every day. So he has every copy of Arrowsmith's changing map of India from the accession and before to his death. And I mentioned Jai Singh of Jaipur as one of the great astronomers. In Germany, the terrestrial and celestial globes were used in teaching, and so this German missionaries taught him about the connection between astronomy and geography, and he also used electrical machines and others. This is the atlas. These are all the geography books. You don't need to see all of them. But let me move to the most important point I want to make here. Apart from reading Alexander von Humboldt's personal narrative of discoveries in America, this is his autographed collection of Serforoji's from 1829. There I'm actually holding it in my hand. The Humboldt travels had beautiful pictures, and he could imagine all the things that he didn't see. This is the point I wanted to make. Serforoji decided that he could teach geography to Marathi and Tamil-speaking children more easily through a Kuravanji dance drama. So he put the entire atlas into songs in Marathi, in Karnataka ragas and talas, and the Kuravanji is dancing all of this. She goes to Indira Loka and she's talking to Indrani, and she talks to Indrani. Indrani says, "When is my husband coming?" And the Kuravanji says, "Before he comes, let me tell you a few things that I saw along the way. I have been flying through galaxies." And Indrani says, "Excuse me, could you please tell me, does the earth revolve around the sun or does the sun revolve around the earth? Tell me, what is the moon's orbit and what planets revolve around the sun? What is the diameter of the earth's sphere?" And the Kuravanji immediately starts reeling off all the distances and everything in yojanas and meters and everything. So science he wanted to teach through dance and drama, which were we will skip the botany part of this. I'll just get to the end now. In fact, I've talked about the medicine. Is Shyam here? Do you think you could move forward to the second part of because that's my last point I want to make, is about the Madras Literary Society. We're almost there, because I don't want to detain these people far too long. There's a lot here about William Jones and others, but let me get back to the Madras Literary Society. Two things, the last points I want to make in the talk are, Serforoji, because of his mastery of two cultures, he became better known than almost any other king or prince in India at that time, in Europe. That means his name was written up in all the journals and magazines, the Asiatic Journal, and since he subscribed to them, he actually had accounts about himself, including the Bishop Haber's narrative about his visit to Tanjore in his library on his bookcases. This reflexivity is particularly interesting. So anytime he wanted, he could take it out and see what they said about him. But what happened at the end was that, and throughout his life was that, he also was seen as the great source of Oriental knowledge. And this is the the second and third points I want to make are these. The second point is that it was because he was an Orientalist, he was becoming a Western-style Orientalist who was cataloging things, you know, organizing things, looking at them through European modes, even at the same time as he's working through Indic modes, that he becomes amenable to Western Europeanists. We have to keep going, yeah. The next one has a cover page. It will come. He is elected to the Royal Asiatic Society, which is the Royal Asiatic Society of London, of Great Britain and Ireland. Let's pause here. This is good. Let's pause here. If you can see this, the first honorary members, it was formed in 1823, and the first honorary members in 1824 are His Serene Highness the Duke of Orleans, the French Duke, His Majesty the King of Oudh, the Nawab of Lucknow, His Royal Highness Abbas Mirza, Prince Royal of Persia, and the fourth is His Highness the Raja of Tanjore. I mean, the status of these people versus the status of Serforoji, what made them elect him on top of all these other people? And I also make the point that he subscribed with a subscription fee of 10 guineas, which is a lot of money, for the first printing and publication made by the Royal Asiatic Society, London, The Travels of Ibn Battuta, translated by Samuel Lee, 1829. The first copy of this book is for His Most Gracious Majesty George IV. The subscription copy is for the Raja of Tanjore, and his signature is there. So, I will conclude with remarks on the Madras Literary Society, the people there, and his relationship with them. Unfortunately, I cannot go into great detail because I lingered too long on my interest in Serforoji's library. But on the left here is Sir Alexander Johnston. He is a figure who did not belong to the Madras Society. He was from Ceylon, but he was one of the most important South Indian figures in the British history of South India. He was sympathetic towards Indians. He had grown up in Madurai. He was a very close friend of Colin Mackenzie, who surveyed South India and was also a contemporary of Serforoji's. Serforoji was a supplier of Oriental knowledge from his library and his kingdom to these people. Not just Pandits, he supplied Marathi Pandits, he supplied Tamil Pandits and Sanskrit Pandits to all the colleges, including Fort St. George, but he also presented to them architectural drawings in the Western style. Colin Mackenzie, the Surveyor General, used Indian and Anglo-Indian artists to go around the countryside with him and document temples, monuments, inscriptions, and so forth. Serforoji supplied some of these artists from his court, and he himself employed them to form his own versions of all these things, and we shall quickly see that. We will not linger over all these other things because we've heard of them. So while I keep doing that, please listen to me and don't look at the pictures. What happens now is that the Royal Asiatic Society in London is formed a lot after the original foundation in Bengal of the Asiatic Society of Bengal. That local knowledge about India, which was being gathered by Europeans, was deposited in the Asiatic Society of Bengal. Similarly, the Madras Literary Society gathered knowledge about South India. The most important figures are, should I stop or? You will change, okay. Keep going. I want to get to, yeah, we've seen all these things, so keep going. So what happens here is that I've already mentioned Francis White Ellis. I now mentioned Alexander Johnston. A third figure that you will get is Henry Harkness, who was a little later, C.P. Brown, whom I mentioned just now. All of these are very important. And then an early figure, Sir Thomas Strange, will all figure in the Madras Literary Society. Okay, so let's stop here. Harkness. ancient and modern alphabets. This is by Harkness. And let's move a little further. We can just quickly go through this. Next one, please. We will stop at Manora. Okay. Or maybe one more. Let's go for one more further. Serforoji himself created multilingual inscriptions in English and other languages. He copied the Brihadishwara temple inscription. He let the Daniels paint the copy the pagoda paintings. He created an inscription in the big temple himself in Marathi, the Bhosala Vamsha Charitra. Could we pause there at this slide? Yeah, let's stop here. Okay, so these are I will summarize this because I can't go into each one. Let's take, first of all, Thomas Strange. Thomas Strange was the Chief Justice of Madras. And he corresponded with Francis White Ellis about the rule of adoption in South India. South India was different from the laws that Sir William Jones and his pundits were putting together for governing India and Indians, the Hindu law and the Muslim law, back in the late 18th century. The people in the south said, this is not our law. We follow the different smritis. We follow the Smriti Chandrika and we follow other texts. So you have to tell us our law according to that in the British courts. So Francis White Ellis was very well-versed in Sanskrit and Tamil, and he had the pundits at his disposal. So he found out about the South Indian law, and then he corresponded with the Chief Justice who didn't know any Tamil or any language, so he was dependent on Ellis. Ellis was very close to the people. I cannot go into his wonderful biography. Just look him up and you can see all the things that he did for Tamil until his tragic death at the age of 48 or 49, before he had published any of his great findings. But so Ellis had a terrible time with Serforoji. It all began beautifully. He had been appointed as the first circuit court judge in Kumbakonam, the first British court. Serforoji was already angry that they would have British courts where there used to be Maratha courts. That was bad enough. But this Ellis decided to haul a servant of Serforoji and put him in some kind of prison because he said he mistreated somebody. So Serforoji said, he's under my jurisdiction, who are you to tell me what to do with my servant? And this big thing was very bad. But just 3 months prior to that, or 2 months, maybe 6 months prior to that, Ellis had just arrived, all starry-eyed, had heard about the great library of Tanjore, and a cleric from Calcutta who wanted to convert everyone to Christianity, but he was also interested in Sanskrit because he wanted to find out what the pagans and heathens actually believed. So the first thing he does is he goes to Serforoji. I'm now talking about Claudius Buchanan, who was the provost of the college in Fort William, Calcutta. He comes to the south, he goes to Serforoji, he tells Ellis that there's this wonderful library here. When you become sub-judge or judge here, you should go there and find some manuscripts there. So Buchanan gets a catalogue of Serforoji's library and shares it with Ellis. Then Ellis, as soon as he arrives, writes a beautiful letter to the resident of Tanjore and says, "Dear Mr. Blackburn, I hear that Serforoji must have very rare books there. I want these 2 books. One is the Vaidyanathiya commentary on the Smriti, and the other is the Sudhi Vilochana. Does he have those 2 commentaries?" Serforoji writes a beautiful letter back and says, "I'm so sorry, but I'm so glad to learn about these books. If Mr. Ellis is of the kind of person who will go to other parts of India and find these books, I would like to collect them because I want to have a complete collection of our law books, not just what is local." Now, fast forward to 1812, when Strange is still the Justice of Madras, and adoption questions come up. And when adoption questions come up, Ellis says, the question is, can a boy be bought, a son be bought? Krita Putra is one of the categories of a child adoption. And it is forbidden in North India. Ellis says, it is forbidden only to Brahmins in South India. You can buy, this is slavery, right? You can buy a putra according to the Smritis here. Now, strange knowing of Serforoji's reputation sends the 13 Pandits of Serforoji's court a letter saying, do you believe Mr. Ellis or do you have your own opinion? They send the thing back saying, obviously not. We believe in the Smriti Chandrika and we would not countenance. They says it's the Akasha Kusuma, which means it's like a flower in the sky. We do not accept this, adoption by buying. And so Ellis and Serforoji are forever parted, and that is a very interesting moment. The other, Harkness, is an interesting figure because he was interested in education, and he writes to Serforoji in the 1820s. He was a military officer in Tanjavur. Serforoji wanted Harkness to be the tutor for his son Shivaji because he was an educator. Harkness ends up in Madras and becomes, I think, the secretary of the Madras Literary Society, does the alphabets, writes about the Nilgiris, goes and represents Madras at the Parliament and the Privy Council in 1833 or 35, and says that the South Indians are a very highly educated and knowledgeable people and they shouldn't be treated in this way. So he speaks up, like Sir Alexander Johnston. Alexander Johnston, whom you saw at the Royal Asiatic Society, he was the one who proposed Serforoji for the honor of the honorary member. He said, this king has done more than anybody else to bring Europeans and Indians together, European and Indian knowledge together. So the aim of the society in London, which was the first one to admit senior prince as an Indian person to its offices, whereas the Indian societies, the Bengal Asiatic Society, the Madras Literary Society, they did not accept Indians as members. And this is a very interesting thing. And immediately, too, at this time, the Madras Literary Society becomes an auxiliary wing of the Royal Asiatic Society of London. And after that, they find it convenient to accept Indian members, but much, much after that. All the great pundits and assistants of Colin Mackenzie and others were not allowed to be proper members of the society. The Calcutta Society was a bit of an exception. Both Jones and Colebrook accepted certain pundits to give speeches, even if they were not members. They were allowed to talk about inscriptions and books and so on. Harkness was a very open-minded person, but even he did not propose Serforoji for membership in the Madras Literary Society until it became the auxiliary wing. Here is a set of architectural drawings sent 1803 from Aureyar Kovil, Atmanatha Temple by Serforoji. And here are Colin Mackenzie's survey drawings. You can see how similar they are. Sculpted pillars, the Society for British Architects. Shivaji, the son of Serforoji, sent these in 1835 when he was elected member of the British Royal Society for Architects. And he sent Serforoji's drawings because Serforoji had died, but these drawings are now in the British Library and various other places. And here is that great tower that Serforoji built for the Nelson and British victory over Napoleon, Manora. And this is done by this was presented by Serforoji to Captain James Michael, officer commanding Tanjore Residency in 1818, and now it resides in the Royal Asiatic Society. And here is the great Nandi bull sent later by Shivaji, but these are all Serforoji drawings, Kumbakonam, Sarangapani Temple, and so on. I will not say anything more about this, except I will conclude by saying that Ramras, maybe I should talk about him for a moment, Ramras. Ramras was the first person to be asked to publish something with the Royal Asiatic Society of London. He published Essay on the Architecture of Hindus, London, 1834. This was a tragic moment for Serforoji. He had already died 2 years prior, but he had a whole set of architectural drawings and the notion of writing about the architecture, but he was too ill. So he lost the chance to become a published author. He had subscribed to the other publication in 1829, and he had been elected honorary member, but he could not become the great Orientalist that he wished to be. And Ramras, who also died tragically young, much younger than Serforoji, It was published posthumously, but Ramras was an amazing intellectual, and this is the point I wanted to make. It was easier for the assistants, associates, and those who worked with Europeans in subordinate positions to get accepted into European positions of status than for kings and princes, because they were considered somehow inimical or non-subordinate or something like that. And there could also have been the opposite. Maybe many princes and kings did not want to be part of that Orientalist mentality. So Serforoji is a very complex figure. His election to the Royal Asiatic Society was a unique, one-time thing of all the hundreds and thousands, the 565 odd princely states, and this is not even a princely state. A non-prince becomes the first prince. And Alexander Johnston says this about him. He combined East and West in such a way that he is the best of princes, and that is why we want to elect him. And I will conclude my talk with that. Thank you. So, I suppose we have some time for questions, and we will do that. It is late, but we started late, so anything that you can do, I would be very happy to accept.
Are most of these documents in the Saraswati Mahal, or many of them are in the British Library and outside of India?
Both. The Tanjore Raj records are all in Modi, and I cannot read Modi. Nobody can read Modi very fluently these days. You need experts. But a large number of them, randomly, they're in bundles. You saw the bundles. The bundles are not chronological, and you have to open each bundle, and the contents have not been entirely, they're being surveyed. But whatever has been opened, 11 plus bundles were then subdivided into various categories like administration and so on. So the Raj records tell us when Serforoji bought a Kashi manuscript from here or whatever. So that source is there. Serforoji did not keep track his expenses are there, so you can follow his trajectory on. Then his bills to the resident, to the agent in London are acceptable, accessible, not entirely, only partially. But one of the advantages we have is the British records, is that Serforoji was not allowed to correspond with anybody. It was a surveillance state, right? Everything had to go first through a Modi copy, a Persian copy, and then go to the resident, who was William Blackburn, 23 years. Blackburn hated Serforoji's guts. He loved the Pudukkottai princes because he could mold them from age 9, and he said, they are my sons. But Serforoji, 21-year-old Serforoji who has his own mind, he says, he's a wayward prince and he has his own mind. But Blackburn was very duty-minded as well, and all of that correspondence is preserved. Unfortunately, the political correspondence doesn't mention anything about cultural things, but the cultural things are considered not so important. But then if you can comb through 8 volumes of the Tanjore district records and requisition each volume and go through the pages, you come across some gems, and that is what myself and others who work on it are doing. So with the Marathi Modi records, we have there is translation in Tamil, thank God, 3 published volumes, which are fantastic, by the Tamil University in Tanjore, who's also continuing to work on this. And then there are the British records, and the Tamil Nadu archives has the best Tanjore district records. So you have to work it all. And I also went to Halle, Germany for the missionary records, and Copenhagen and Tranquebar for the Danish records. Thank you.
Thank you.
But Ranveer, my main sources are the literary and other productions of the court, which are all archived in Saraswati Mahal. It's the best source of all. Yeah. Sujata, Mike, so that everyone can get it.
So is there anybody at all who can read the Modi script now?
Yes, there is always at least one Modi Pandit, and there were Modi transcribers. I have been out of touch in the last 6 years because of family circumstances, but some things are being digitized. There's a lot of progress being made, and I believe, and I don't want to speak out of turn, the princely family of Tanjore can correct me, and they can also say what is going on now. But there was a project. Mr. Vivekananda Gopal, Dr. Vivekananda Gopal, is at the Central Institute of Language Studies in Mysore, or was the last I knew. He had done the maximum work in Tanjavur. And I know there have been training courses. And of course, you have Modi readers in Pune. And there has been some talk of cooperation and collaboration between Pune and Tanjavur. When that happens and things move faster, the transcription of these things into Devanagari is a necessity. At the moment, I have great difficulty reading the Tamil transcriptions because many of the sounds of Marathi, all the aspirates, they are not there. And already they are mangling British and other names. And so I'm reading some things at a third remove. This is very, very difficult. So anything which is non-Sanskrit, non-Tamil or non-Telugu is very hard, or non-Marathi is very hard to decipher. For example, this man's name is Benjamin Torin, and they call him Mr. Durian. How am I to know that's Benjamin Torin? Yeah. Thank you for the question. It was a very good question. I'm glad you asked about the sources. It's a long and slow process. Yeah. And also, I've been mainly working on the literary texts, like the Kuravanji dramas and the dance dramas and the courtly texts and all the wonderful texts that were produced there. They tell a story which is not told in the British records or any other records. Devendra Kuravanji tells you a wonderful story of how did Indians want to teach European astronomy to Indian kids. How did they want to transform Aesop into Marathi? These are, or Amarakosha in print. In fact, I'll comment on Amarakosha in print. What is the point of Pandit? Does that mean they're going to stop memorizing Amarakosha? No. It's just a little aid which is going to sit there, an aide-memoire, as you call it in French. And they will still do the traditional curriculum, but the print will allow them to distribute if it gets larger and larger print runs. And the Tarka Shastra, for example, I should mention one other thing. There were these great schools, free schools, Patashalas, in 5 languages: Marathi, Tamil, Persian, English, and Hindustani, I think, Telugu. And these languages were languages of use all over South India. And Serforoji gave a free education to whichever child wanted a full education in his so-called chatrams, alms houses, ALMS, HOUS. They are named after the queens of the Maratha kingdom. So there's Yamunambai Chatram, Yamunambabai Chatram, Ahalyabai Chatram, and the most famous is the concubine Chatram of Serforoji, Muktamba Chatram. And Muktamba Chatram had schools for everybody, and there was one order for styluses and palm leaves, but also for printed copies of the Tarka Shastra from Serforoji's press, 71 copies. So clearly it wasn't that small, except he didn't publish elsewhere, that's all. But within his kingdom, he had great ambitions. So I wanted to mention that. So I've given you what I call a glimpse of this monumental person and his monumental project. I hope that that's good enough. Yeah? Thank you. Okay. Thank you for coming and patronizing this and listening to me. I really appreciate it. Thank you. And thank you. Thank you for inviting me to present Swamiji and Padmavati and the entire Doraiswamy family. Thank you.
We'd now like to honor Professor Indira with a shawl, and for this I request Sujata Shankar to honor her. And for your information, ma'am, Sujata Shankar, she is of Maratha descent, descendant of Diwan Madhavrao, Diwan of Travancore.
And Madhavya was originally from the Tanjavur area, Kumbakonam College and then Madras School, right? The famous school, right? So Madhavya is a very important thing. And Subbarao, who went to Travancore, was also from Serforoji's court, and he's involved in the Aesop translation and all these things. He also went to Calcutta. So
He was also Diwan of Indore and Baroda after Travancore.
Right? He's very well known. He's almost like a prince, is that right?
you so much for a
Thank you
wonderful
so
lecture.
much. I really appreciate your doing this.
Thanks, Guru.
Let's stand together. So, Padmavati, you too, and Padmavati, you too. Maybe with Swamiji.
Yeah, that's better.
Let's go around Swamiji. Because without him, none of